What if the most hated man in human history was not a traitor? What if Judas Iscariot, the man whose name is synonymous with betrayal, the ultimate villain of the Christian story, was, in fact, the only one who truly understood the mission? What if the institutional Roman Church, the same church that banned the Book of Enoch and the Gnostic Gospels, deliberately demonized Judas to hide a secret so profound it would shatter their entire foundation of sin and salvation? What if a forbidden gospel, lost for 1,700 years, buried in the Egyptian desert, was found? A gospel written not by Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, but by Judas himself? And what if that gospel reveals that Jesus gave Judas a secret command to perform the very act of betrayal that would change the world? This is not a theory. This is not speculation. This is the story of the Gospel of Judas. For 2 millennia, the story has been simple. Judas was greedy. He was a thief. For 30 pieces of silver, he betrayed the Son of God with a kiss. His guilt was so immense that he hung himself. It is a clean story, a simple story, a story of good versus evil. But have you ever felt the plot holes in that story? Why would Jesus, who could read the hearts of men, choose a man he knew would betray him, and then make that man his treasurer? Why would the Gospel of John state that Jesus knew Judas was the traitor, yet wash his feet at the Last Supper? Why would the betrayal be necessary at all, when Jesus was a public figure, preaching daily in the temple? The authorities didn't need Judas to identify him. If you have ever felt that the official narrative of Judas doesn't add up, you were right. You were sensing the scar tissue of a story that had been deliberately altered. The institutional church needed a villain. They needed a traitor. They needed a fall guy to create their simple narrative of sin, Judas, and sacrifice, Jesus. But the Gnostics, the early Christian mystics, told a different story. A story so dangerous, the early church father Irenaeus, in 180 AD, wrote an entire book attacking it, specifically naming and condemning the Gospel of Judas. The church knew this other gospel existed, and they tried to destroy every copy. They failed. In the 1,970 seconds, in the sands of Egypt, this impossible text was found, a tattered papyrus codex written in ancient Coptic. It passed through the black market for decades, a secret whispered among collectors. Finally, it was acquired, preserved, and translated by National Geographic in 2006. The world was finally allowed to read the book that Irenaeus had tried to burn, and its contents are the most shocking revelation in Christian history. It is a text that claims to be the private, secret, the conversation between Jesus and Judas Iscariot in the 3 days leading up to the Passover. It begins not with a story, but with a scene of profound separation. Jesus finds his 12 disciples, and he laughs at them. The disciples, confused, ask, "Master, why are you laughing at us?" Jesus replies, "I am not laughing at you. I am laughing because you are not praying to my God. You are praying to the lesser God, the God of this world." In one sentence, the Gnostic framework is laid bare. This is the same secret we uncovered in our last investigation. The disciples, Peter, James, John, were still asleep. They were still in their ignorance, worshiping the demiurge, the jealous God of the Old Testament. But the text says that one man, Judas, understood. Jesus pulls Judas aside, separating him from the rest, and says, "Step away from the others, and I will tell you the mysteries of the kingdom." Jesus reveals that Judas is the only one, the only disciple who has the Gnosis to understand the truth. He tells Judas, "You have been chosen. You are the 13th spirit, the one who will be cursed by the other generations, but you will come to rule over them." Judas, in this text, is not the worst of the apostles. He is the best. He is the only one Jesus trusts with the final, terrible and glorious mission. The Gospel of Judas is not a story. It is a dialogue, a raw, unfiltered transcript of the most secret teachings Jesus ever gave. It begins with Jesus finding his 12 disciples gathered together, offering a prayer of thanksgiving over the bread. When they see him, they are overjoyed, but Jesus does not bless them. He laughs at them. The disciples are confused, offended. Peter, as always, speaks first. "Master, why are you laughing at us? Have we done something wrong?" And Jesus delivers a line that instantly rips the veil from the Gnostic truth. He says, "I am not laughing at you. I am laughing because you are not doing this in my name. You are doing this in the name of your God." The disciples are even more confused. "Master, you are our God." And Jesus looks at them with what the text implies is a deep sadness and says, "How do you know me? Truly, I say to you, no generation of the people who are among you will know me." In this one exchange, the entire Gnostic framework is confirmed. The 11 disciples, including Peter, James, and John, were asleep. They were still, in their ignorance, worshiping the lesser god, the god of this world, the demiurge, the jealous god of the Old Testament. They looked at Jesus, the man, and they believed he was that God. They had missed the entire point. But the text says that one man, Judas, I understood. Judas steps forward and says, "I know who you are, and from what realm you have come. You are from the immortal realm of Barbelo, and I am not worthy to utter the name of the one who has sent you." In that moment, Jesus realizes that Judas, and only Judas, has the Gnosis. Judas knows that Jesus is not the God of this world, but a messenger from the true Father, the realm of pure light. Jesus, seeing this, separates Judas from the others. He says, "Step away from the others, and I will tell you the mysteries of the kingdom. It is possible for you to reach it, but you will grieve much." This is the secret teaching. Jesus explains the Gnostic cosmology. He explains the true Father, the abyss, the pleroma. He explains the fall of Sophia, and he explains the creation of the demiurge, the lesser god who rules this physical world. And then he gives Judas the real mission, the secret command. Jesus explains that he, the divine Christ, the spark of light, is trapped in the physical body of Jesus the man. This body, like all physical matter, is a creation of the demiurge. It is a prison. In order for the divine Christ to be liberated and return to the realm of light, this physical garment must be destroyed. The other disciples, in their ignorance, were trying to build an earthly kingdom, a kingdom of the demiurge. They were trying to prevent his death. Jesus needed one disciple, the only one who understood, to help him escape. He looks at Judas and delivers the most shocking command in history. "But you, Judas, you will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." This is the secret. The betrayal was not a betrayal. It was a mission. It was an act of liberation. Jesus was ordering Judas to hand his physical body over to the authorities of the demiurge so that his spirit could be set free. Judas was not the traitor. He was the liberator. He was not the greatest sinner. He was the most obedient and enlightened apostle. This is the secret that the Roman Church had to bury. Because if this is true, then the entire story of sin and salvation that they were building is a lie. Once we understand the Gnostic framework that Judas was the hero, on a secret mission from Christ, the clues of the betrayal suddenly snap into focus. The acts that the institutional church has taught us to see as evil are revealed as Gnostic rituals. Let's start with the 30 pieces of silver. The official story claims this was an act of petty greed, but this makes no sense. Why would Judas, a man who had walked with Christ for years, betray the Son of God for the price of a common slave? And why, according to the Gospel of Matthew, did he immediately regret it and throw the money back at the priests. The greed motive is weak. It's illogical. The Gnostic Gospels, like the Gospel of Philip, provide a different answer. To the Gnostics, this world is a prison ruled by the demiurge. The currency of this prison is money. The 30 pieces of silver were not a bribe, they were a transaction. In order to liberate the divine Christ, the Spirit, from the man that clothes him, the flesh, Judas had to perform a cosmic, ritualistic purchase. He had to buy the physical body of Jesus from the powers of this world. Using the currency of this world, he was, in effect, paying the exit fee to the archons, the servants of the demiurge. This is why, as soon as the transaction was complete, the money was unclean. It had served its ritual purpose. Judas, the Gnostic priest, threw the blood money back into the temple, the house of the demiurge. His part of the ritual was done. Now, let's look at the kiss. The institutional church calls this the traitor's kiss, the ultimate symbol of deceit. But again, it makes no sense. Jesus was not in hiding. He was a famous public figure. The temple guards, who had seen him preach, did not need Judas to point him out. This part of the story is illogical. Unless the kiss was not for the guards, the kiss was for Jesus. In the Gnostic Gospels, the kiss is the single highest, most sacred ritual. The Gospel of Philip states that Jesus used to kiss Mary Magdalene, and the other disciples were jealous. The Gnostics knew the kiss was not romantic. It was the symbolic act of a master breathing or transferring his gnosis, his secret knowledge, into his most beloved student. It was the passing of the torch. The kiss of Judas was not an act of betrayal. It was the final initiation. It was Judas, the only one who understood, approaching his master and saying, "I understand the mission. I am ready." And it was Jesus, the master, giving Judas the final transfer of gnosis, the final blessing, the final thank you, before the great sacrifice could begin. This is the Gnostic truth. The betrayal was not a betrayal at all. It was a sacred, prearranged Gnostic ritual between a master who needed to be liberated and the only disciple brave enough, loving enough, and enlightened enough to do the one thing that had to be done. If the Gospel of Judas tells this heroic, liberating story, why have we been taught the exact opposite? Why is Judas Iscariot the most despised name in the world? Because he had to be. The institutional Roman Church needed Judas to be the villain. His demonization was not a mistake, it was a necessity. It was the most important cover-up in the history of the faith. The smoking gun that proves this cover-up comes from the pen of our old enemy, the man who, as we've discussed, led the war against the Gnostics, the Roman bishop Irenaeus. Around the year 180 AD, long before the Council of Nicaea, Irenaeus wrote his infamous hit list, a book called Against Heresies. In this book, Irenaeus specifically names and attacks the Gospel of Judas. This is the proof. The early church knew this gospel existed, and they hated it. Irenaeus mocks it. He calls it a fictitious history, an abomination. He confirms that the Gnostics, whom he calls heretics, revere Judas as a hero, and then he orders their texts to be destroyed. Now, we must ask the golden formula question. What was the motive? Why was Irenaeus so terrified of this one book? Because the Roman church he was building was based on a simple, controllable business model. A model that requires three things. Original sin. Humanity is guilty. Adam and Eve. Blood sacrifice. Jesus, the only Son of God, had to die as a payment for that guilt. Church authority. The church, led by the other disciples, like Peter, is the only gatekeeper that can give you that salvation. The Gospel of Judas destroys all three pillars of that model. It says sin is just ignorance. It says Jesus' death was not a payment for sin. It was a liberation of the spirit. It says the other disciples, like Peter, were ignorant fools, and that Judas was the only one who understood the Gnosis. This was a declaration of war. If the Gnostic story was true, the entire Roman Church was a fraud. If Judas was the hero, then Peter, the Rock of Rome, was a fool. If Jesus ordered his own sacrifice, then the Church's story of original sin was a lie, and the Church had no power, no control over anyone. It was uncontrollable. Irenaeus and the institutional Church had no choice. They had to rewrite the story. They had to turn the hero into the traitor. They had to turn the apostle of Gnosis into the greedy demon. They had to demonize Judas to save their own institution. And for 1,700 years, their version of the story was the only one we were allowed to read. I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this investigation from? It is incredible to see this forbidden knowledge, this Gnosis, reaching awakened souls across the entire globe. Are you in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, in South America, or Australia? Let me know your country or city in the comments below. Let's see how truly global this community of knowers has become. The final proof of Judas's guilt, according to the Church, is his death. The story is that his sin was so great, his guilt so overwhelming, that he could not live with himself, and he hanged himself. This act seals the narrative. Judas, the traitor, is punished and goes to hell. But just like the betrayal itself, the official story of Judas's death is full of plot holes. The Bible itself cannot agree on how Judas died. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, says, "He went away and hanged himself," a simple, clean suicide. But the Book of Acts, chapter 1, tells a completely different and far more gruesome story. Peter says, falling headlong, his body burst open in the middle, and all his intestines gushed out. These two stories cannot both be true. One is a quiet suicide. The other is a horrific, explosive death. The infallible Word of God has a massive contradiction. This is the first clue that the story has been tampered with. The early authors were scrambling to create a punishment that fit the crime they had invented. But the Gnostic Gospels offer a third and far more profound explanation, an explanation that has nothing to do with guilt. Let's return to the Gnostic mission. Jesus' secret command was, "You will sacrifice the man that clothes me." The mission was to liberate the divine spirit from the physical, material body. Jesus, the Master, had shown the way. His spirit was liberated from his own body through the crucifixion. Judas, the best disciple, the only one who understood Gnosis, had completed the first half of his mission. He had liberated his master. But Judas himself was still trapped in a physical body. He was still trapped in the prison of the demiurge. The official story says he died of guilt. The Gnostic story suggests he died of completion. To the Gnostics, the ultimate goal was to escape the material world, to shed the garment of flesh, and ascend back to the pleroma, the realm of light. Judas's death, whether by hanging or by a spiritual explosion of energy, his body bursting open, was not an act of guilt. It was the final act of Gnosis. It was the final act of liberation. He had successfully liberated his master, and now, his mission complete, he liberated himself. He was the first true Gnostic, the first to follow Jesus' real teaching, all the way to the end. He shed his fleshly prison to follow the Spirit of Christ back to the true Father. This is the secret. The institutional church needed Judas to be a guilty suicide, damned to hell. The Gnostics knew him as the great martyr, the first to achieve ascension after Christ. His death was not a punishment for sin, it was a graduation from the material world. For 1,700 years, the story was sealed. Irenaeus and the Roman Church had won. Their propaganda campaign was a total success. The Gnostic Gospels were burned and forgotten. The story of Judas the traitor was cemented in the consciousness of the entire world. The jailer, the demiurge, had successfully hidden the key, Gnosis. And then, the 1,970 seconds. A forbidden text, buried in the 4th century, is found in the Egyptian desert. It is the Gospel of Judas. The very book that Irenaeus thought he had destroyed. The Great Awakening, the increase of knowledge prophesied for the end of days, had begun. After decades on the black market, the text was finally translated and released to the public in 2006 by National Geographic. We are the first generation in 1,700 years to read the other side of the story. This is not just history. This is a mirror. The story of Judas, like the story of the serpent, forces us to ask the most uncomfortable questions. It forces us to ask, are we, like the 11 disciples, asleep? Are we, in our good intentions, worshiping a lesser God? Are we worshiping our institutions, our traditions, our church, instead of the true, unknowable Father within? Are we afraid of the traitors in our lives, when in fact, they may be the very people who are liberating us from our own prisons? The Gnostic texts do not ask for blind obedience. They demand radical awakening. This forbidden knowledge does not destroy your faith. It completes it. It reveals the real mission of Christ, not to appease an angry, jealous God, but to rescue us from one, to remind us that we are divine sparks of light, and to give us the Gnosis to find our own way home. The truth about Judas was never lost. It was just hidden. It was waiting for a generation brave enough to listen. That generation is us. If you are ready to continue this Gnostic investigation and uncover the other secrets the gatekeepers tried to bury, join this revolution of the mind. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Don't miss the next video. We will continue this investigation, uncovering the secrets of the other traitor, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the Gnosis of the Divine Feminine that Peter and the Church tried to erase. I'll see you in the next investigation.